welcome to another episode of the CEO Pick. I am Dave Osh, the CEO of Varlinks, that sponsors this show. We partner with leadership teams to create transformative change in growing complexity and uncertainty. The CEO Pick is a video podcast devoted to sharing the thought leadership of successful CEOs. And such a leader is our guest today, Stuart Frankel, the founder and CEO of Narrative Science. Narrative Science creates software that writes stories from data to drive understanding and results. Its artificial intelligence-powered technology automatically turns data into easy-to-understand reports, transforms statistics into stories, and converts numbers into knowledge. Prior to Narrative Science, Stuart was the president of the performance division of DoubleClick and was a member of DoubleClick's senior management team when the company was sold to Google. He is a lawyer and a CPA and one of the few entrepreneurs who haven't grown from product engineering or marketing. Hello, Stuart, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
We just talked about that you're celebrating your 11th anniversary at the beginning of next year. It's very soon. So what have you learned so far about your experience running the company for the last 11 years?
Well, I'm not sure we have time to cover the whole the whole 11 years. But I've learned a lot. Of course, we started the company as you noted in early 2010. But actually, prior to that, the idea was incubated at Northwestern University. So I started the company with two computer science professors on the faculty of Northwestern University. So this thing has been bubbling for even longer than 11 years. And I think what I've learned over a period of time that long, first of all, you have to prepare yourself to play the long game. We often hear that companies like Narrative Science should be wildly successful within 3 to 5 years because that's what fits into the investment horizon of investors, some investors. So you've got to be prepared to play the long game. And there's going to be a series of twists and turns. It's interesting. I think the longer you go out, the more linear, if you zoom out, the more linear that the growth is and the development of companies can be. But the reality is it's much messier. It's much messier than that. And so even though we've been around for almost 11 years now, we've had our ups and downs, and I've always found that the key to that is understanding that and embracing that, and not fighting back against that. Things go in different ways, and they certainly don't always go the way that you had expected them to. And I've learned to embrace that and understand that that's part of the journey. That's a feature, not a bug of doing this for as long as we've been doing it.
Yeah, I heard it for so many entrepreneurs that were ready for a sprint and find themselves in an ultra marathon.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it for sure.
Yeah, and not on a flat surface. You have all these ups and downs in the journey, right?
Yeah.
So how do you managing the ups and downs in this journey?
Well, it's something actually that I've had to really learn to do. One of the pieces of advice that I got many years ago that I often give to people is that when you're in a role like this, you have to treat problems as normal. We I think as humans tend to believe that the world we're living in today is the same world we're going to live in 2 years from now, or even 2 months from now. But we know things change quite a bit and things evolve quite a bit. And so for me, it's really been about understanding that things like losing a customer or losing an employee or being late on a ship date for a feature of your product, those are things that just are everyday normal things that occur in just about every company. And one of the ways that I've sort of mastered my own internal demons is to understand that I'm not the only one going through this, and I'm certainly not the first person to go through this. And that is really the gig that I signed up for as CEO. I think the job is really certainly about thinking about the long-term business and creating a vision and building a team, but it's also just dealing with micro problems all day, every day, and understanding that that's a normal part of the job, and again embracing it as opposed to fighting that or becoming a victim or thinking that you're so unique out there in the world.
And we talked before about your specific way of looking at problems. You just mentioned, you have all these daily problems, and how do you identify them and categorize them in different ways to help you to see what you need to deal with, how to prioritize them?
Well, it's a good question. Another thing that I think I've learned, certainly, in my career, but more so over the last 10 years or so, is that most decisions don't really matter in a huge way. It's more about making the decision and moving forward as opposed to being paralyzed by indecision and not moving forward. And so from a prioritization standpoint, while certainly you have to deal with things kind of coming and going all the time, I think where people often get tripped up is that they treat each decision point almost the same. So they devote the same amount of time, they do the same amount of research, they want to get everybody's opinion on things. And I think just I've learned to recognize certain patterns and things that have come up over and over again, where I feel like I've got more experience than anybody else in the room on a particular issue. I won't hesitate to say, look, guys, I appreciate the debate, but trust me on this one, we're going to go in this direction. Where there are other times where either I don't do that because I want to create a developmental opportunity, or I may not know the answer. And I'm also, I think, good at now figuring out things that are, again, existential, right? Things that really we need to get right, or there's a huge downside to getting those wrong, versus the things that you just got to sort of make a decision, move on. And if it's not the right decision, that's okay. Recalibrate and tweak things along the way.
Yeah, it's just identifying the problems and look at them in a different way from different lenses. Yeah. You as the CEO, the team. Interesting. I read recently an article about you, or an interview with you, and I learned about your experience that you work all through high school. And I remember that, and you helped me out here, but if I remember that you found that you have the experience of the owner, stay there all the time, and you mentioned it in the context of trust, that you felt like you didn't trust, so you needed to be there all the time. So how does it come? What was the impact on you and your leadership philosophy? But the combination of command and control and trust, how do you bring them together to find the right balance, or how to build trust?
Yeah. Well, first of all, good research. I did start learning. I did start learning some of these lessons when I was, probably 11 or 12 years old, when I started mowing lawns, which really was the first thing that I could do, and being a golf caddy and those kinds of things that you could do at that age. I think one of the keys really is to understand that you have to build a team around you that is empowered to move the business forward. And if you have built an organization that requires your presence and your input on at every meeting or on every decision, I think that there's a high likelihood that you won't succeed. People who become CEOs, they often become CEOs because they've done a great job in an earlier gig, and they've done great work. They've learned to rely on themselves in many cases, and they've been rewarded for that. But when you become a CEO, it's very hard to really effectively, I think, manage that way. And so for me, it was really about, and it has always been about, building a team, one that I can trust, certainly to do their jobs, but importantly, a team that trusts each other. You and I have, we talked about this. I've been influenced by Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage, right? And building a first team and understanding really that your loyalty really is to the members of your first team, as opposed to maybe all of your direct reports. We've all been in these situations where people will say, I'm just trying to protect my team. There'll be a VP of a function. I'm just trying to protect my team. When you start to hear those things, I think the alarm bells should go off, because really the team that you should really be most focused on is the team of peers that you're working with. People talk a lot about the health of an organization, and I think the health of the organization clearly starts at the top, not just the CEO, but that senior leadership team. And that's taken me a while to learn. Earlier in my career, I was command and control. I wanted to be a part of every decision. I felt like I was needed to be a part of every decision. But of course, over time, I've learned that's just not the case.
Yeah. And sometimes you need it, when you have critical decisions that you need to make very fast, like in COVID, there's no time for this consensus management, and
Absolutely.
And you need to bring it. So it's always a combination of all the ways of leadership.
That's right.
Now, you're in a data story business, and we use data for decision making. So what's your decision-making style? How do you make a decision? What's the decision-making process in your leadership team?
Well, actually, this morning we were just talking about our 2021 plan. And, we've all gone through this, and there's always the horse trading that takes place when, your numbers aren't adding up the way that you expect them to. And our head of marketing said to me, hey, just give me the number. Just tell me what you want me to do, or to tell me the number you want me to hit, and we'll hit it. We were talking about expenses and investment and so forth. And what my response was, listen, I could do that, but I feel like I might miss something if I just give you a number and you go and you build a plan to that number. I'm going to miss potentially the reasons why you started with a higher number. And so, for me, it's the balance between the data, but also understanding what's the story behind that data. What is the context of that data? I think that's one of the most difficult things about being data driven. We can kind of convince ourselves that we've got a spreadsheet in front of us, the numbers add up, the decision must really be clear. And in fact, one of the reasons we started the company is because we don't believe that that's the most effective way to make decisions. There has to be context. And so if I feel like I don't have context to or enough context around a particular problem that we're dealing with, I'll just keep asking for that context until I find it. Now, it is often the case, though, where there are also some obvious things that you don't need a whole story around. And the key is not to overthink those and overanalyze those, to understand what situation that you're in.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, actually, that you have the data, and sometimes the answers are not in the data and not in the story, not in narrative, sometimes not even in the context. It's come from so many other places, and now you connect them together.
Yeah, it's true. The thing about data, first of all, you can manipulate data to tell any story that you want. We know that, right? There's a lot of bias in analysis. If people are advocating for a certain position, it's often the case that the data will support that decision. If somebody is advocating a different position, then lo and behold, that same data might be presented in a different way to advocate that different position. So I do think that a healthy level of skepticism when you are involved in the data analysis part of whatever decision that you're trying to make is necessary. The other thing that I think we can do, and I try not to do, is when the data is obvious, when it's pretty clear, sometimes we'll say, I'm going to ignore that. It must not be right. So I know the numbers add up to that, but my gut tells me something different. sometimes that's okay, but I think you have to question, hey, is there really a lot of evidence that I should move in a certain direction, but I have implicit bias, or I came predisposed with, not willing to be open to changing my mind. I think it's really important to understand, are you just ignoring obvious evidence, or is it just one piece of the puzzle that you're trying to interpret and use to apply to some decision-making process?
How do you align the team when there are disagreements about before you make a decision?
That's a great question as well. For a while, I was, I didn't want a ton of conflict. Intellectually, I knew that there needed to be kind of give and take, but I didn't like when, people were at each other's throats, or where there was just conflict for conflict's sake. And over time, I realized, though, that conflict and healthy conflict, in that, fair exchange of ideas in an unfiltered way, is often necessary, to ultimately get a team to be on the same page. My hope is that the discussion in the room is where the work is taking place, and that when we leave that room, one, the discussion is over, if that's appropriate, just from a timing standpoint. And two, that if everybody's not on the same page, we've at least reached a consensus that we need to arrive at a decision, and this is the decision, and everybody in the room is going to support that decision. What often happens, and we've all experienced this, is you think that just happened, and then your team leaves and two people get together and they go off to the side and they continue that meeting and they continue that discussion. And that can really hurt you down the road, because it's clear that while you thought you had at least a decision made, if not a consensus, you didn't. And so the thing that I continuously talk to my team about is, hey guys, when we leave the room, this is what we're doing. Okay, so while we had debate and while we had different opinions, we now have to have really a shared view of how we're going to move forward. And if you can't get there with the group of people you have, then you have to change the people. Because I truly believe one of the most disruptive things that senior leaders can do is to have these off to the side conversations that ultimately undo all of the work that you just did, or you thought you were doing.
Yeah, and sometimes not even with small groups. It can be an individual. It might be that during the meeting was convinced that's the right thing to do, and after the meeting, it started to diverge to different places and different directions.
Yeah, it's true.
How do you find out if you have a team that actually in a meeting committed, but you see after that things are not running as you expected? How do you actually manage that situation? And it happened to me in the past that they have a team that we agreed on something as a team, and then you saw that the individuals actually that committed doing and not completely aligned with the decision.
Yeah. Look, I think that should be relatively straightforward. You have to grab those people and you have to point out that behavior and you have to correct that behavior, or again, that person can't be in that role, or they can't work in your organization anymore. I feel that strongly about it. I think those things are really cancers to organizations. Now, don't misunderstand me. When you leave the room, you may get new information that informs maybe the decision that you just made or informs another decision. And I'm not talking about ignoring all of that. It goes back to what I said before. We think that the world tomorrow is going to be exactly as it is today. It's not. And so you also have to have a group of people who have the courage to come back and say, by the way, I've learned more information now that I think can really influence this decision that we just made. And I think you need really both of those things.
So you come and you revisit the decision again and again, every time the data changes. And yeah, I see that.
I think most decisions are iterative and not binary, right? Where it's either right or wrong and it's right forever or it's wrong forever. I think it's we have a thesis here. Let's refine this thesis over and over and over again as more and more information becomes available to us. I always tell people, I talk about this when I talk about financial modeling, for example, right? So the worst thing that can happen when you build your first financial model is that you actually achieve those projections, right? In your first year of business, for example, because you then delude yourself into thinking you know what you're doing and you've got a real predictable business on your hand, when in fact you don't, or 99 times out of 100 you don't. And the key with building a model is that you look at where you missed and the strategic and tactical implications of that, and it allows you not to refine the model, which of course happens, but it also really alerts you as to potential misassumptions or incorrect things that you thought about the business that you now need to rethink and recalibrate. And I always find that as a shorthand way to describe that phenomenon.
Great. Stuart, thank you so much for finding the time and share with us your wisdom and experience.
It's my pleasure. It's great being here.
And thank you for watching the show, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next episode.